looking at the whole year, you have the spring, you have the summer, you have the fall and the winter, and a lot of in-betweens that are all have their own energy.
So let me once again welcome you, those who are joining. My name is Aman, and I'm here with my colleague Elizabeth. And good morning and good evening to you all. We are starting these session two, kind of season 2 of these calls now. This is called Lean by Nature calls. And just to give you a heads up, the purpose is to try and draw some inspiration from nature and use that to improve our personal and professional lives. So Elizabeth has spent a lot of time with nature over the last few years. Several times she has been out in nature for a couple of months at a stretch, if I'm not wrong, Elizabeth. So that has been a great nature perspective that Elizabeth really brings in. And I have been primarily into the quality in the lean management and trying to deploy the lean management principles in the organization. So this is a space where we are trying to draw inspiration from nature and draw some parallels, some synergy between the nature and the lean principles. So that is what has been the tone of these calls. Uh, as I said, this is the season 2, if you will. We started last year in October, and we already have around 6 calls before that. And in case you're interested, you can look at those, it's on YouTube. And Elizabeth, do you mind putting the link on the chat? So all the previous calls recordings are available. So the first season we really talked about the continuous improvement process and how really it happens in the organizations. So we followed step-by-step approach of improvement, starting with the define and the measure and the analyze and the improve control phase. So the standard continuous improvement cycle as the organizations follow, and followed up with the nature principles. So that was the tone of the first season, if you will. We started in October and I think continued till December. So that was almost 3 months. And now we are at a stage of turning it around. So this time we're going to turn it around, and Elizabeth is going to really talk about the nature experience first, and then we are going to see how we can draw some parallel from the lean management principles. So that is what we have been doing till now, and thank you, Elizabeth, for putting in the YouTube link. And we also have a website, www.leanbynature.org. And I think, Elizabeth, if you can put in the link as well. Yeah, thank you. So you can, all the details of the call and the background, everything is on the website. And last but not the least, I'll request you to subscribe to our mails that we send every time before the call using the link that Elizabeth has just put in. So that will put you in our subscription list, and you can receive the updates as and when we have these calls. So on that note, we will go ahead and get started, and I would like to now invite Elizabeth to share her perspective about the nature experience that she has been having, and we'll take it forward from there. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've been in the whole like continuous improvement and quality world, so to speak, first in IT software development, and then I think 7 years ago I went into wilderness and nature connection experiences, and throughout my process of learning and connecting with nature, I realized that there is a lot of wisdom in nature, and especially looking at natural cycles can help us a lot in figuring out how we can also structure our own projects or improvement processes, or any kind of action that we take, to look at the different cycles, like the daily cycle and the monthly cycle and the yearly cycle. It all has certain um, principles, or there's a different energy throughout this cycle that's different. Like looking at the whole year, you have the spring, you have the summer, you have the fall and the winter, and a lot of in betweens, that are all have their own energy. One is more outward bound, and there's a lot of energy and excitement, and the other one you kind of draw in more. And you can also use those same energies to kind of plan your projects or your improvement processes. Um, so a lot of the things that I've been doing over the last few years, also in my personal life, was a lot to kind of adapt my work to those natural cycles and to that natural flow, to I don't know, just kind of fit better into what nature intended to do, like how we also as nature connected people, and in the past, or other people who are still living nature connected lives, um, structure their lives. And it's just it's more easeful after we don't fight like we have to work 24/7, or like all year round you have to be the same kind of high energy people. That's just not sustainable in the long term. And so yeah, I've been lucky enough to have found an interesting project that I want to just touch shortly. That's called the Eight Shields Institute has brought a kind of cycle where they look at 8 directions. That's why it's called Eight Shields. And I'm going to share a picture of that. If I can find it. So here you see all the different times of the day that have different qualities. So first you have the sunrise, or even like usually it starts with the pre-dawn. That's kind of the beginning and the ending. And then there's the sunrise that has that really inspiring energy, and the mid-morning where there's a lot of activity. Like if you look at the birds, there's a lot of activity there. And you go into midday, there's more focus, and in the afternoon there's more of an integration. And the sunset, the west, is kind of the harvesting time where we all come together again. And the post-twilight, where we kind of integrate the day, where we're recollecting maybe what happened, telling stories. And at midnight we're more into that integration, and more integration, or kind of preparing for the next day phase. So that's kind of the overview of what I based that whole framework on, and looking at the different energies of that. And so I'm gonna go right into the next image that I prepared, which is yeah, the idea that I developed based on that framework of the Eight Shields Institute, where they observed a lot of nature-connected people and peoples that still live that way, and what they had and what energies they were following. And yeah, looking at the project stages, or how I have been doing a lot of my work is in the beginning, when you're coming into some new place, or there's something new you first observe. You don't act right away. You observe. Okay, what the hell's happening? There's, for example, some new person coming into the team. So what do we do? First, we observe. We need to get to know that person. Need to figure out. Okay, well, how does that all fit? And then we go into the envisioning. It's the same as the sun cycle, where we're saying, okay, we have a new person. Now we can dream about all the different things that we can do now because we have that additional skill or quality. We can do this and this and this, and we can just kind of create pictures and ideas and visions. And from there, we can then go into connection phase, which is basically the kind of more grounding. Okay, all those visions. How does that feel? How can we bring that into the world? How can we more manifest it, and then really go into the action and or adaptation if it's a continuous improvement process. And but just the action itself is not going to do it, because we have to strengthen our new patterns, create like more sustainable framework around it or whatever, just kind of strengthening the roots, then it's more stable. And in the West, kind of going into the sharing and teaching mode, because then we kind of, okay, we learned something new. We need to tell the story about it so that everybody else learn, like either the team or in the bigger company learns, okay, that's what you did. That's great. We can maybe adapt this or this into their own projects or teams. And through the teaching and sharing, we even learn more about how it worked, because then there are some questions and other stuff, or just kind of reflecting on what happened teaches us more. So then we can at the next step go into the integration phase, where we can, okay, now it's kind of running, and it's flowing now. That's nice. And at the end, the mentoring stage is also really important, because then we have the wisdom, and then we can guide others in that process alongside them. So that's kind of the overview of all of it that we're going to talk about in the next few calls. And yeah, that's the kind of the basic idea, that where I draw a lot of inspiration, not only from the H. Shields Institute and what kind of work they did, but also in the more detail, I did do a training in permaculture, which is a short version for permanent agriculture. And they have 7 principles of how they observe nature, like the founder or the inspiration person observed nature and learned certain things of how an ecosystem works and how to recreate such a ecosystem where everything works together flawlessly, and it's just it's holding up itself in a way. And to follow those 12 principles is kind of, if we go more into detail in the different steps, that's where I draw a lot of inspiration from, as well as a process that's called Dragon Dreaming. That's also based on that cycle of first dreaming the vision and then going into action, and how that can be applied for all kinds of team projects. But for me, it was important to really see, okay, how can we not only look at those cycles, but go more into it. And I then reflected on, I did like a 2-month immersion program where I lived for 2 months outside in the wilderness primitively, which is basically no technology at all. We had a knife and we had a tomahawk. And So we were kind of thrown back at our basics, and a lot of like reflecting on it later and writing down all the different realizations that I had, they basically fall into that same framework, where it's about the observing and the visioning. Why do I actually do that? Why would I go into that experience where it's really stressful and hard sometimes, and it was in winter, so it was really cold. So you have to have a strong why the hell would I do that, and um, and to have that drive even when the going gets tough, and to continue with that, and to connect to that deeper source. So I found that it's all in there, and that's why I came up with that kind of cycle framework adaptation for processes and projects. So yeah, that's kind of my first impulse, and yeah, maybe Aman, you can share how that kind of fits together with the lean thinking.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Absolutely. I think that has been very insightful, and I've been trying to take some notes while you were talking. And these 8 steps that you talked about, to me, that really resonates with the classic Deming process improvement cycle, which is called PDCA, and that's stands for plan. P stands for plan, and D stands for do, and C stands for check, and A stands for act. So it's a classic Deming cycle that whenever you start a project or an initiative, you must spend a lot of time in planning, and the better you plan, the more better your implementation is going to be, which is the do part. And then there's going to be some checking of whatever corrections we need to do, and then we need to finally act after incorporating those corrections. So that is a classic continuous improvement cycle, if you will. And when I looked at your 8 steps, and maybe you can try and put it back on, just to get a perspective. So when you talked about the observe and the envision, that to me is the planning phase, where you are really observing what's the right kind of things to look at, and envision, as you know, there's a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I remember the habit it talks about is begin with the end in mind. So I think that's what I relate to when you say envision. You really envision the goal, the end perspective. So to my mind, the observe and the envision actually is the planning stage, and that has to be really robust, as you rightly said. And the more time we spent on these, the easier the next steps are going to be. So how I kind of classify this whole 8 steps is, the observe and the envision is the planning phase, and then you start doing the implementation. So then you start connecting, and you start and acting and adapting, and you start so these are essentially the 2 steps that you really put the plan into action. So the connection and the acting steps are really tied into the do phase of the PDCA. And then you strengthen. Now, obviously, the strengthening is on the basis of the outcome that you get when you implement, when you connect, when you act. You find some response. We want to further improve on that, let's say. So you strengthen that, and that's where I think will be the C part, the check, the plan, do, check. So strengthen is more, checking and course correction, and probably getting into the higher trajectory, if you will. And then the last 3 stages that you pointed out, the share, integrate, and mentor, that's like really the action part, where you absolutely know what's going to work well, and things are going to be at a much faster pace and a much assured pace, because you already know what will work and what will not. So that's how I connect these 8 stages. And there are a couple of other like quality frameworks that I definitely like to point out at this point, which resonate with this cycle, and especially emphasizing on the planning stage. And what we do is when we do all the lean management and when we do start the project, lot of emphasis is on the planning phase, and there are a couple of activities that are done. I like to just call out a few. Let's say one is called the force field analysis. So when you really observe and envision, you really find out which are the driving forces for the change to happen and which are the restraining forces. So if the driving forces are more, definitely the change is going to be positive. However, if the restraining forces are more, then there is going to be a pushback to the change. So we need to make sure at the start of the improvement cycle, which is at the observe and the envision, we need to make sure that the driving forces are more, kind of robust, and we try to address the restraining forces as much as we can. And that is all part of the planning phase. And if we do that well, then the whole project improvement really happens seamlessly. So that's one thing I really resonated, where I want to pay special emphasis on the planning aspect. And the other thing which I want to just talk about, again from the quality and the lean management framework, there is something called as COPQ, and that stands for cost of poor quality. And as the organizations do improvement, if they spend less time on planning, if they spend less time on observe and envision, then there are going to be repercussions in terms of customer rejections. There could be failures at the internal processes, and it is going to increase the cost of failure multiple times. So that's the that's the message, that the earlier you capture the defect, the better it is, the cheaper it is. But if you allow the defect to carry on to the subsequent processes, then it multiplies exponentially. The cost of failure multiplies. So again, emphasizing on the observe and envision. So from all these 8 steps that you shared, Elizabeth, to me this observe and envision kind of resonate the most with respect to planning. If we, and again, as the saying goes, well begun is half done. So I think that's what I could resonate on this model. So back to you for any further insights. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that gave me a lot of additional things that I want to share, because you said first with the PDCA cycle, in the act phase, like the share, teach, and integrate and mentor, the pace goes up, so everything's faster, and it's kind of the project might be running faster, but ideally we don't put so much energy into it anymore. So looking at nature, that's kind of, if you look at the growth of a tree, for example, in the spring it goes out and it grows and it creates fruit, and then as soon as the strengthening phase comes, the fruit, they're as big as they're gonna be, but the strengthening is kind of the really ripening of the fruit, and then later on it's kind of letting go of the process and kind of retracting in energy wise, as seen from the outside, because it's slowly taking in the energy into the roots so that it survives the winter, and the more inward looking energies kind of, and seeing, okay, how can I also make sure that my younger like, even with trees, there are young trees that might be needed to be taken care of, and so it's a lot more inward bound, even though on the outside it might look faster for now. So there is a kind of a shift that in the spring it looks very fast, and then later on it kind of slows down a little again. So that's, at least for the nature part, I think it's important looking also at all the different companies and projects, that we need to make sure that all of these steps get an equal amount of time, which rarely happens because we mostly focus on the acting, or maybe even strengthening, or the envisioning again and stuff like that. It all needs the same amount of time or energy spent, because they're all equally important. And so a lot of times I do kind of agree with the observe and envision part is really, really important and needs to have a lot of focus, because that's kind of the first step, where you put another stone on that and another stone on that. And if that first stone doesn't sit well, the whole tower is going to collapse. But every stone is important. It just has less of kind of repercussion in the whole cycle. So every step is important, but the first one is kind of laying the base. As I said before, if you know exactly where you're going and why you're doing it, and if you're on the right spot, kind of with the right people, then you can just, that's a good foundation to start. And then you can focus on the next steps, and not, oh, okay, I need to have to go back because I don't know my vision anymore and stuff like that. So then that's where the flow kind of stops sometimes. And yeah, I think that was my main additional input. And I think, yeah, if people have any questions, they can put them in the chat, and we can try to answer them as good as possible.
Absolutely. And Elizabeth, on that, in fact, when you talked about these, and I'm sure there'll be questions and comments, and we'll appreciate that. You talked about the Envision. One thing also resonated with me: when we start a new project, we really have a couple of stages. The first is the conceptual stage, where you really thrash out the concept, conceptually it's going to work or not. Then you don't really go into production immediately. So there is a prototype stage, there's a model, you create a small model, see whether it's going to work or not. Then you go into a pilot phase, where it is kind of a dry run, to make sure that you don't commit those mistakes in the final production. So I think envisioning, again, again it comes back to the same aspect, that is the critical step, where you really think through the various stages, so that, and all the problems you anticipate right at that stage, it is going to make the project much more smoother as we go along. So that was just an afterthought.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, since there are no questions, I'm just gonna give you a short snippet of what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to go more in detail about the observe and envision phase, because yeah, there are a lot of details that we can learn from nature, how it kind of feels like we can do it more sustainably and holistically in a way. Because a lot of times I learned all this different kind of, okay, that's how you plan or do certain things, but only after I learned how other animals or plants do it, then I realized, okay, that's kind of how it fits all together, and how I can make it more sustainable and more in the flow. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about this first in our next call, and then go into 2 phases each in the next upcoming calls. Yeah, and thank you for joining, and hope to see you again in 2 weeks. And yeah, if you signed up, you're gonna get the reminder with the link to join again. Thank you.